There are moments when God doesn't just speak. He places something sacred and unbearable into a man's hands and waits to see if he will carry it. Hosea had heard the voice before, familiar like breath, weighty like stone. But this time, it carried something deeper, a calling that would pierce through comfort and reputation alike. Then the Lord said to me, "Go, take to yourself a wife of whoredom and have children with her. For the land itself has given itself to harlotry and turned away from me." Hosea 1 verse 2. The words came without hesitation. They landed in his spirit like fire in dry wood, sudden, irreversible. This was not a message to speak out loud. This was a life to live. Hosea understood. He would not stand at a distance from brokenness. He would enter it. He would not warn the people from behind a veil. He would walk among their pain, carrying a love that would be questioned from every side. He would take her, just as she was, with no promises of purity, no guarantees of change, and he would call her his wife. Her name was not yet known to him, but the ache already was. The ache of obedience, the ache of choosing love before it is ever returned. And the Lord continued, "You will remain with her, even when she runs, even when she forgets, because I remain with my people, even when they leave me." That voice carved something into him, not a rule, but a wound. And from that wound would come a story, a holy story, dressed in scandal, soaked in grief, burning with mercy. Years would pass before others would see what Hosea was living. But from the very beginning, God had already begun his work, not through sermons or signs, but through the quiet unfolding of a love that refuses to let go. There was no thunder that day, no curtain torn, only a man listening, and a God who speaks into the silence when the time comes to show what love really looks like.
She wasn't chosen because she was pure. She wasn't chosen because she believed. She was chosen because God was writing something no one had the courage to imagine. Her name was Gomer. To many, it was just a name, rough on the tongue, fading into silence. But in the story God was telling, nothing was without meaning, not even the sound of a name. Some say her name meant completion or ending, and maybe that was the point. She carried a name that echoed with finality, yet lived a life full of collapse, a woman whose steps were never steady, a heart that wandered not once, but often. There was no poetry in her choices, no honor in the paths she followed, but still her name remained, a strange word resting between despair and promise. Hosea met her knowing what she was, the looks, the whispers, the weight of what people assumed. But he also knew the one who had spoken, and in that voice was no room for pride. She didn't change before he found her. She didn't repent to earn his hand. She simply was, tangled in stories he'd never hear, tired in ways he would never fully understand. And yet, God had called her beloved before Hosea ever did. That truth is easy to overlook, but it sits at the center of everything. God didn't ask Hosea to rescue her. He asked him to love her, not to fix her, but to make her home. There's something painful in watching love enter places where it will not be returned right away. Something holy in choosing someone not for who they promised to become, but for who they are right now. And Gomer was that choice. No grand moment marked the beginning, no ceremony softened the edges. Only this, a man sent by God, and a woman with a name like an ending. But even endings, in God's hands, can hold the first breath of mercy.
There are seasons when pain settles in quietly, weaving itself into the corners of daily life so gently that it's hard to tell when it began. Hosea had watched her, day after day, learning how to offer love to someone who did not yet know how to receive it. He gave her space without distance, presence without pressure, and a home that waited with open hands rather than demands. Gomer was not a puzzle to solve. She was a human soul, restless and bruised, carrying the shadows of choices that had once felt like survival. For a time, it seemed as if peace might find a place between them. There were evenings when the silence between them felt lighter, when her eyes stayed longer on his face, when the rhythm of life no longer fought against itself. But the stillness did not last. There came a day when Hosea opened the door and found only absence on the threshold. No explanation was left behind, no note on the table, no whispered goodbye in the hallway, just emptiness, the kind that doesn't echo, but presses in with a weight that says, this time she meant to leave. She had returned to the life she once knew, not because she was drawn to beauty or love, but because brokenness often returns to what feels familiar, even when it wounds. Hosea heard the rumors. He didn't seek them out, but they arrived anyway. Quiet voices on street corners, glances held too long, silence that said more than words could manage. He did not go after her in anger. He stayed where he was, listening to the ache that had settled in his bones, the ache of love that had not been answered but refused to die. Every night he carried her name into prayer, not with resentment, but with something deeper, a sorrow wrapped in faith, a hope that had forgotten how to speak but still knew how to wait. He kept her place at the table, not because of ritual and not to prove a point, but because he remembered the voice that had once spoken to him in the stillness and placed this covenant into his hands. That voice had not left him, and neither had the love that came with it. Some days the silence spoke louder than grief. Other days it whispered things Hosea could not understand, only feel. That love, when it comes from the heart of God, is not a transaction or a reward, but something rooted deeper than choice, deeper than betrayal, deeper than reason itself. He could not explain why he continued to love her, but he knew, even now, that love was still alive, and love, in its most mysterious form, was still holding its breath for her return.
There are moments when love must speak without words and act without being invited. Hosea had loved her with quiet faithfulness, with the kind of patience that doesn't measure time but simply abides. Even after she walked away, even after she gave herself again to those who never saw her as more than a transaction, his love remained, steady, wounded, waiting. He could have let her go entirely. He could have closed the door she left open, turned his gaze towards silence, and allowed her absence to become a conclusion. But something deeper was unfolding inside him. Something that did not come from instinct or culture or law. It came from that same voice he had heard once, in the stillness, when God gave him a calling that no one else would understand. She had fallen so far down that she could no longer find her way back on her own. The streets no longer welcomed her, even as they used her. The ones who once chased her had grown tired, and those who claimed to possess her now treated her like a burden to be sold. And so she was. A price was placed on her, a number, a value, a measure of flesh. She was no longer even seen as a person, only weight, only debt. Hosea heard where she was. He listened, not to gossip, but to the still voice that had never stopped speaking to him, the one that whispered not obligation, but love. And then he walked. He passed through the familiar streets, not with a prophet's authority, but with a husband's ache. He entered the place where deals were made, where no one prayed, where no one believed in restoration, and he stood there, not to judge, but to buy her back. He took out the silver, he took out the barley, he counted it with his own hands, not with resentment, but with the quiet resolve of someone who knew this moment was holy. He paid, fully, without hesitation. Not because she had changed, not because she had asked, but because love, when it is shaped by the heart of God, does not wait for permission to redeem. She was his, and now she was free. No crowd applauded, no music played, only the sound of a woman breathing again, and a man who never stopped walking toward her.
There was something in the way Hosea moved through that marketplace. Not as a prophet, not even as a husband, but as someone carrying the weight of a love that did not come from within himself. He did not speak of fairness or of repayment. He simply paid. And in that moment, something ancient stirred, as if heaven itself leaned closer. The coins in his hands were ordinary. The barley was nothing more than grain weighed and measured by merchants who had no interest in mercy. Yet the act, that quiet, deliberate act, opened a doorway into a deeper story. A story that had been forming long before Hosea was born and would continue long after his name faded into history. Because somewhere within that silent transaction, something eternal was being rehearsed. A man walked into a place of disgrace. A woman stood covered in shame. A price was demanded, and love answered completely. Hosea didn't know what would come centuries later. He didn't see the wood of the cross or the blood that would stain it, but the shadow of that sacrifice passed through him all the same. His life, bruised and surrendered, became a mirror, reflecting what was still to come. There would be another who would come for his beloved, and she would be lost in far deeper ways. She would forget her name, trade her inheritance for illusion, and turn her face away again and again. But he would still come. He would not carry silver. He would not bring barley or grain. He would give his own blood, poured out without demand, without defense, without delay. Because love, real, divine, unbreakable love, doesn't barter. It gives. And Christ would give everything. Not to purchase worth, not to secure a promise, but to bring back a people who had no way of returning on their own. The cross was not a display of strength. It was the quiet declaration of a love so complete, so relentless, that even death could not interrupt it. Just as Hosea stepped into the brokenness of Gomer's world and made her whole again, So the Son stepped into the brokenness of ours. He did not flinch at our ruin. He did not pause at our shame. He embraced it, carried it, and turned it into the place where grace begins. We were the ones standing behind the chains. We were the ones with nothing left to offer. And still He came. Still He paid. No part of this story was accidental. No piece was too small to matter. Hosea was never just a prophet. He was a signpost, a living echo of a greater love that would one day be written in blood. And now, when we speak of redemption, we speak not in theory, but in history. Because He came, because He paid, because He called us His.
There's something unsettling about grace when it finally reaches you. Not because it condemns, but because it arrives so quietly, without conditions, long after you've given up on being found. The story of Hosea and Gomer isn't trapped in a distant century. It doesn't remain confined to dusty scrolls or ancient names. That story breathes. It moves through time and finds its way into places we never thought it would reach, into ordinary rooms, into hearts worn thin, into lives that never imagined God still walks toward what others abandon. Because He does. This is no longer about Gomer. This is about you and me. We have wandered, sometimes slowly, almost without noticing, as if the soul can drift the way a boat slips from its dock, quiet, gradual, and real. Other times the turning is more sudden, born from pain, or pride, or weariness too deep to explain. We step away not with rebellion, but with resignation. And somewhere along the way we stop believing that love is still looking for us. But it is. The God who spoke to Hosea has not changed. He has never chosen distance. He has never found satisfaction in absence. His longing is not fragile, and His memory is not short. He remembers. He pursues. He enters rooms we've locked from the inside. He calls names we've forgotten how to answer. He stands quietly where shame has told us we no longer belong. And He waits. Not with disappointment, but with the kind of hope that doesn't ask for explanation, only return. You may feel far. You may feel like the weight of your wandering has buried whatever closeness once existed. But the truth is simpler and far more mysterious. He is already near. Closer than guilt, closer than memory, closer than your ability to feel it. Because that's who He is. A God who doesn't flinch at betrayal. A God who still prepares a place at the table. A God who speaks the same words He gave to Hosea in a time of ruin. She belongs to me. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor. This is the shape of divine love, carried across centuries, nailed into history, and whispered again now in a voice just soft enough to reach where the noise has worn you thin. And still, He comes for us.
There are no maps for this kind of return. No clear trail. No rules to follow. Only the sense, deep, quiet, unmistakable, that something sacred is still reaching for you. If you've ever run, you know what it feels like to keep moving, even when there's nowhere left to go. You know how silence becomes a shield, how shame wraps around the heart like a second skin. You know how easy it is to pretend you're fine,
and how hard it is to admit you're lost. But still, He's near, and He's been near the whole time. Not watching from above, not waiting to accuse, just walking the same roads in the same dust, looking for the one who thought love had given up. If that's you, if any part of you still wonders whether it's too late, too far, too broken, then hear this. There is still a place for you. There is still a voice that knows your name. There is still a love that remembers what others have forgotten. And even now, it is coming for you. You don't have to climb your way back. You don't have to explain where you've been. You don't have to earn the welcome that's already waiting. You only have to turn, even slightly, and you'll find Him already there. And maybe tonight, or whenever these words reach you, you'll hear Him say again what He said so long ago. You are still mine. If this touched your heart, help it reach someone else. Leave a comment. Share the story, not for numbers, but for the one who doesn't know yet that they can come home too. May you be found in the arms of mercy, and may your heart remember, He never stopped calling you by name.